Hi there, and welcome to part 3 of the evaluation and analysis of performance for A-level PE. So we'll move straight on, and obviously you can see from this that we're talking about the justifications and the physiological and psychological, which in this example I'm doing at the end, but if you want to and you're confident enough, you can do it as you go along. Okay, so we just get started straight away. So what I would have done for each one of the sessions is make sure that there's an effective warm-up and cool-down. So for that there will be the 3-part warm-up, which will be the heart rate raiser, some kind of dynamic stretches, and then a skill-based activity as well. This is to ensure that there's a significant amount of blood pumping around the body. Psychologically you're preparing yourself for the activity that you're about to take part. When we talk about Thorndike's laws of readiness, and this is where it comes absolutely into its own. And then also at the end of each one of the sessions will be a cool down, and this would involve a heart rate lowerer, so some kind of gentle jogging just to keep the blood flowing so that we don't have blood pooling, so we're continuing that respiratory pump, and then some kind of static stretches. You could also do developmental stretches in this situation as well, so from 20 to 30 seconds to increase flexibility if that's a requirement. And that would be the effective cool down. Within the training program as well, we're making sure that we're following the principles of periodization. So with that, what we're doing is organizing the training into blocks. Now the reason we're doing that primarily in this situation is to avoid injury, and also to structure the training so that we can have short and long-term goals within that. So what I've done is broken it down into mesocycles and then shorter microcycles. The mesocycles are about 4 weeks long, and then the microcycles, where there are shorter term increases, is 1 week long. So what the adaptations I'm expecting to see is twofold, because there was the skill-based and then also the physiological. So just focusing on the physiological to start with, I'm looking at dynamic strength, which is obviously strength with movement. And some of the factors that affect that are obviously the age and gender, and also the cross-section of the muscle fibre to start with. So it's very important that we try and develop the cross-sectional, the cross-section, and what fast twitch fibres we're incorporating and recruiting. So what we should hopefully see towards the end is an increase in the neural pathway. So therefore my speed of reaction would be significant. But we'd also get some hypertrophy, so this is the increase in the size of each one of those muscles, and then also an increase in muscle mass. And all of these will allow me to have more power, because strength and speed obviously equals power, and power is an absolutely essential component of making the tackle. That's a positive tackle as well as a negative. That means hitting forwards as well as also taking the contact yourself. So each one of these will have an impact, and a positive one at that, on the ability to perform the tackle. Okay, so when we're talking about the skill component of it, the way that I'd set this out is initially I started with a closed practice. Now the skill itself is an open one, however we worked on a closed practice to start with so that we can isolate the skill, make sure that they're paying attention to the relevant cues, and we can also groove the skill and then move on to a varied practice. Now the reason we would have it as a varied practice, as I mentioned, is it is actually an open skill. There's lots of different variables. The person coming towards you can move to the left or to the right, and therefore we have to have that varied practice. So once they've paid attention to the relevant cues, which would be the significant teaching points, then they can groove the skill in a closed practice and then move forward to the varied, which I did from week to week. So the type of practice I would have done would have been a whole part whole. The reason I would have done this is the person could actually perform the skill, but their technique wasn't fantastic. So we would have performed the whole skill, broken it down into those small components and looked at the elements that he wasn't as good at, and then put it back into that whole situation. And a lot of the time, a lot of the practices were masked. And again, this was because he was probably in the associative phase and not the cognitive phase. So for that reason, we needed to overload him, and then this is really effective for grooving the skill. And I think as well, we're following sort of the principles of operant conditioning. We're trying to enhance that stimulus response bond between what's effective and what wasn't. So when he performs it effectively, he would see the outcome, so we would have the knowledge of the result, be it that he was able to knock the person over. The other thing I think is really important as well within the training program is to make sure that we have bilateral transfer, and I mentioned that earlier on. So what we're doing is just not focusing on the right hand side. So we're also focusing on the left hand side. So you tackle with the left, then the right, left, then right, or you can overload the right and then overload the left. But that way we're allowing bilateral transfer to take place. I would use visual and verbal guidance just to make sure that we're giving an effective demonstration so he's able to see what that's supposed to look like, just to adjust it. And then also verbal as well. I think that would have been really effective because, as I said, he has a mental image, but he just needed to enhance some of the finer points of his technique. So therefore, verbal guidance would have been an effective type of guidance to use. I think within the training program there would have been intrinsic and extrinsic feedback. So the intrinsic would have obviously been his kinesthesis, and also the extrinsic would have been the knowledge of the result, and also me giving feedback. And that would have been positive or negative feedback, but making sure that he's paying attention to the relevant teaching points. I think later on during the training program, though, the cognitive theory comes into its own in the sense that we've had varied practices. So this is learning from the different scenarios that I put in place. Again, intrinsically, this allows you to have a kinesthesis, but also the knowledge of the result as well is really effective in that varied practice. I think it would have been important to establish whether the person was anxious, so whether it was their state or their trait anxiety. And I think what we could have done is probably done the SCAT test, and then try to get them to pay attention, so they use the cue utilization focus so that they can really pay attention to the relevant cues in that given situation to try and reduce the anxiety just before a tackle. And it might have been this anxiety that was making his technique fall away and not actually focus where he should have been. It also may have been is an introverted personality in what you would consider to be an extroverted game of rugby, because of that position that he plays was number 10. The introverted personality may have been quite significant, so we would have paid attention to that as we were going through the training program to try and establish whether that was the situation. All right, and then in relation to the aggression, because his tackles weren't very effective, there wasn't a lot of aggression or wasn't a lot of assertion. So it may be an idea that we focus on his arousal levels. So prior to the game, is he getting the somatic and cognitive arousal? And if there isn't somatic arousal in place, then maybe we would need to work on practices that would allow that to happen, and therefore increase his somatic arousal, and then hopefully those arousal levels would transfer into assertion when he's actually making his tackles. And because the skill is quite simple, it's important to have higher somatic arousal than lower. Okay, it may have been also his attitude towards the tackle. They may just not have a very positive attitude towards it because of a prior experience or from one of his peers. So it's very important here. I think we try and establish what his attitude was, and by doing this training program, I think one of the outcomes will be because of his physical increase and potentially his technique, his behaviour may change, and then also his belief about tackling may change as well, which comes into that triadic model. Hopefully that would also come through this enhancing of his physical components. It may also be that the Ringelmann effect, so it's something through observations that we would have to have a look at, is because other people can make the tackles, maybe he's moving away from his responsibility. But again, I think one of the things that will come out of this training program is because his physicality is increased, and also hopefully his confidence and potentially his assertion, he would able then to be more confident to actually take the challenge, the tackles, as opposed to potentially moving away from them and allowing other people to complete them for him. So, and therefore we've identified that the Ringelmann effect may have taken place. Okay, so that ends the final part of the analysis of performance. Do have a look at all three of the different sections. This is an example. This isn't the absolute perfect model, but it gives you hopefully a very good idea about the type of level that you need to be looking for and the type of detail all the way through. Okay, any problems, any questions, just contact me on the ASH PE website. Thanks very much.